Thanks for being here, everyone. In response to the provincial government's newly proposed legislation that is intended to stifle Calgarians' ability to have their hard-earned tax dollars flow back into their communities, I have some thoughts. We've actually been doing the same work that the province says it's doing. We're fighting for our fair share of funding from the federal government. And now that cities actually have the ear of the feds, and they've created funding streams that will allow us to build more homes, to fix broken roadways, and make sure that your drinking water is safe, the provincial government, the very same one that wants to cut red tape and operate at the speed of business, that provincial government now wants to slam the brakes and slow things down to the speed of a bloated bureaucracy. The legislation has been tabled, but we have not heard about how things will roll out. We have heard that there will be no additional resources to manage the influx of agreements that the province will need to review, and there is no indication of how long that review period will take. And remember, this applies to all municipalities in Alberta, more than 300 of them. I have a very hard time believing that this new system of provincial review will not create any delays, increased red tape, or costs, all things that Albertans will be on the hook for. Further, this legislation impacts municipalities, post-secondary institutions, school boards, and any other provincial entities that they deem to be worthy of this overreaching review process. So that's a lot more than just 300 plus municipalities. It could be thousands of entities that have their ability to access federal funds severely curtailed. And keep in mind, while we wait for a newly minted provincial Bureau of Overreach to plod through agreements, other cities across this country will be eating our lunch. Other cities will take what belongs to us. And that's not something I'm interested in enabling. I've fought too hard alongside other mayors from across Canada to push the federal government to fund us properly. And after a 2.5-year battle that finally resulted in a $6 billion announcement last week, I cannot accept that a provincial government with control issues is about to take away what rightfully belongs to Calgarians. The people of this city deserve to have their hard-earned income tax dollars flow back into their communities for the services that they deserve, and that's something that's worth fighting for. Happy to take any questions.
Mayor, is this going to impact, do you think, the municipal priorities that the city has, given that now they have to weigh what the provincial priorities are before they would approve federal funding?
So I would hope that provincial priorities would be aligned with Calgarians' priorities. We have heard through many surveys that Calgarians are worried about housing, they are worried about public safety, they're worried about strong mental health and addiction treatment programs, and those are things, frankly, that the city has been investing in. We invested in our budget last year $27 million towards affordable housing, another $15 million towards improving safety on transit, $6 million for mental health services, $18.2 million for the police, as well as another $13 million in emergency medical response through our fire department. Frankly, all of that money should have come from the provincial government, but it came from us because we listen to Calgarians and we are delivering on the things that they deem to be important. So if the provincial government is prioritizing the things that are important to our residents, then this may be an easy process, but I don't know how they feel about those priorities.
The Premier did also mention that part of the impetus for this was they wanted a fair deal from Ottawa. Given some of what you've just outlined there, how would you respond? Because the city's been asking for the $300 million in offloading to come back to them.
Yeah, frankly, when one order of government is looking for a fair deal from another, I think it's important for them to understand whether they're giving a fair deal to their partners. And frankly, the provincial government right now is not offering a fair deal to Calgarians. We are sending out more money in property tax than we are receiving back. We have not been made whole for money that disappeared, like the funding for Calgary Police Service that our local council maintained, even though it was stripped by the provincial government. So I would say we're absolutely not getting a fair deal. And let's call it like it is, the federal government was also not giving us a fair deal. And they're still not. They're getting closer by announcing some of the funding streams that they have. But both of these orders of government have offloaded things to our city, and we have not been made whole yet. We deserve a fair deal. You're right.
Mayor, one of the issues that came up during Premier Smith's press conference earlier this afternoon was holding up funding to Calgary and Edmonton because there isn't equivalent funding going to rural Alberta. Do you think that's fair to Calgarians to have funding for housing held up because the federal government hasn't made deals and equivalents with rural Alberta?
I think the federal government's deals with any municipality need to be looked at in context. We are the fastest growing city in this country. RBC just put out a report a couple of days ago that said we are growing faster than anywhere. They called us a hotspot. And we can't keep up. We've got 60 plus people a day arriving in our city. We don't have housing for them. We do not have the funding for the infrastructure that they need. We absolutely have to be moving quickly right now to at least provide housing and to make sure that our roads are in a good state. We also need to be working with other orders of government to make sure these people have health care and education and a good quality of life. But Calgary is not a small municipality. And as the absolute economic engine of this province, we deserve to get the funding that we are fighting for. I do hope that everyone gets their equitable share, but I will not sit by and say that our money should be held up because someone else hasn't negotiated a deal yet. I'm in it with other municipalities. I work very closely with Alberta municipalities as an entity, with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. I work very hard to advocate for all municipalities. But right now, Calgary needs to be the priority as we are growing the fastest.
Mayor, what do you make of Rick McIver's comment that some of the drama around blanket rezoning and federal funding could have been avoided if the province was at the table?
I mean, I understand Minister McIver's desire to be at the table to talk about funding streams. I would hope that his desire is to make sure that his government is equally able to provide funding. I mean, frankly, in Quebec, when they struck this deal with the federal government that their province disperses funds to their municipalities, the provision is that the Quebec government also provides matched funding. And so if that's what Minister McIver is getting at, I think it's great. I would love to see two orders of government providing funding streams directly to a municipality. I would say that what we've got before us as a planning matter is completely separate than what's before us when we're trying to strike an arrangement on funding. So a planning matter needs to be treated as such, and that is fully within the purview of the municipal government. That's in fact one of the biggest responsibilities we've been given by the province.
Premier Smith, following that question, Premier Smith said, I'm just reading from her notes, that the kinds of agreements she would object to would be ones, quote, injecting ideology. And when she was asked to provide an example, she talked about they, meaning municipalities, quote, they've got to upend all of their zoning agreements with their neighborhoods in return for receiving funds. So she's basically saying the only reason you're going to get a deal with the feds is because you agree to some densification, et cetera, and we'd like to look, they won't look at that one. But what do you think of that? That's an example she has.
So we have a housing strategy that we approved in September. And within the housing strategy, there's almost 100 different recommendations of things that we can do as a council, actions that we can take. We've already started implementing some of those. We have dedicated land towards affordable housing. We have looked at providing incentives for secondary suites. And one of the things that we discussed in that strategy is the ability to create more units on a single parcel. That discussion is what will be before us on April the 22nd. For me and my fellow council members, we are reviewing a planning matter. We're not reviewing a funding or a financial matter. So the way that we grow in our city and the way that we actually provide a greater supply of housing, something that every economist said is absolutely needed right now, that's a planning decision, and that's what we're doing.
So you're saying that whatever decision council takes on planning is not because the feds have made certain conditions for getting the money.
Whatever conditions are within contracts that we either get into or have gotten into with the federal government, that's a specific contract. What we've got before us as a city is a way to create a greater supply for housing, and those two things don't necessarily influence each other.
Would the city have any kind of legal recourse in the event that it wanted to sign an agreement with the federal government, but the province said, no, that particular agreement is not within our priorities?
You know, it's interesting. I would hope that the priorities of the provincial government would be to provide housing to keep a strong economy and to make sure that people feel safe and their well-being is prioritized. If those are their priorities, I don't think there would be any issues, but because I don't know what they will and won't prioritize, because there's no certainty, I think it will be a struggle. If we know that we have access to funding and it gets blocked, frankly, for ideological reasons on their side, that's going to be a very tough pill for Calgarians to swallow. If we knew that we could get mental health funding, for example, if we knew that we could get funding for wastewater management and it was denied for whatever reason, that's tough to take. And I'll give you a very good example. The funding that's being offered for housing has a lot to offer. However, the provincial government has gone after one specific thing, and that has to do with net zero. And so if they will get hung up on net zero on every type of contract that we're getting into, that's a problem for me. I want to make sure people have housing. That's priority. And everything else that comes along with it needs to be negotiated.
Mayor, can you clarify then, if the upzoning proposal is rejected by council, does that put the federal money at risk?
That's not what's before us. What's before us is a planning matter. And if it does put any money at risk, you renegotiate a contract. Quite frankly, the opportunity before us is to increase supply of housing in our city, and that's the thing that we are laser focused on.
So what do you think of a law where the government says it doesn't know how many agreements there are in existence out there? When you look at the long list of entities that this applies to, it doesn't know how many entities there are. It doesn't know how this will be tracked, which department, could be several departments, and it doesn't have a service standard in terms of the approval or rejection of an agreement that an entity brings to it. Is this at all workable?
I think your question really is the struggle that we're all having. Which agreements are they going to want to review? Right now, they've said that they've seen about 14,000, I think, and 800 of them would be the ones that they want to review. I don't know if those are the big ones or the small ones. I don't know if they impact bigger centers or smaller ones. We really don't know. And that's just the ones that they received. I know there was municipalities that said, we don't have the time to do this. So I don't know, as you said, how many agreements are out there and which ones they would want to review, which ones they would refuse. It's all up in the air right now. And when you go into something like this with that much uncertainty and unpredictability, it's really difficult.
Why are two leaders of government not having conversation behind closed doors? Why is this all being, fleshed out through the media? How come Premier Smith hasn't talked to you directly as both leaders of government?
I think this has more to do with the federal and provincial government's relationship than anything else. I believe it is a convenient speaking point to say that we're not getting a fair deal. I think it's equally convenient to fly into a metropolitan center, snub your nose at both the local and provincial government and make an announcement. I don't think it's good behavior on anyone's part. Like I said yesterday, Mom and Dad are fighting and the kids are stuck in the middle, and I'm getting very tired of it. Both of them need to figure out how to put their ideological differences aside and work together, because we've got a city that's growing at a rate that's unprecedented in this country. We are the economic engine of this province and this country, and they're busy fighting with each other. That's shameful.